on my attention. My countrymen, they love their fiction. The words upon now, it's made with good intentions.
Kia ora koutou, and welcome to 1 of 200, Aotearoa's Media and Politics podcast. I'm joined today by Sina Rahmani, who is a bit of a podcaster and producer. So you're involved in lots and lots of different podcasts, aren't you?
Yes, I am. Yes, it is. That is. I can't deny the allegations. I am a lowly podcaster, but this show. I looked up this show. You guys have a ton of episodes, so kudos to you guys. Yeah. And kudos to your listeners, because it's for the record, in case you didn't know this, whoever's listening to this, to make it past, I think it's maybe 100 listens, or most podcasts don't make it past 100 listens in total. So you're already in hallowed terrain, maybe not 100 or download. I got to look that fact up. My point is very few. There's so many podcasts and very few people actually listen to podcasts, which also means people don't keep doing them. A lot of people start podcasts and they end them for whatever reason. So just sticking it out says something about the people on this show, and to do so many, kudos on you guys. It's good. It's good to have a podcast.
Right.
This is the only way we get to talk about politics is in these channels.
Absolutely. And, 1 of 200 was created in order to sort of fill that niche, which was very desperately needed in the country at the time. And yes, indeed, congratulations to the listeners for your endurance, if not masochism, for coming this far with us. So some of the podcasts you're involved in, you set up the East as a podcast, and from that came Tanky Group Therapy. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, Tanky Group Therapy was just a joke we made. It was the origins. It's a joke about the. In my head, I call genres of. I'm like a genre thinker. I think in the world of content and form and genre. So I have this natural inclination to just put things into boxes. It's not a good one. I shouldn't indulge it so much, because who cares at the ultimate day of how something stacks up against how you imagine it should be. But in my head, what I always called that genre of people talking around, many people talking at once to each other, I always called that group therapy. So those are a form of group therapy episodes. And so this was the joke of Tanky Group Therapy. So it was just a recurring set of conversations. They're very popular. We really should do more. We kind of stopped doing them. We could bring them back. I think what's happened is that a lot of the people who were in Tanky Group Therapy are running their own live streams and doing things. And so it's, even if I've kind of taken a step back from organizing Tanky Group Therapy, and same with Justin was also co-hosting them, I think it's more that the conversations have grown and the channels have grown, and that's really I feel my only task is to help create more nodes or in this network of critical people who are talking about the important things that you aren't allowed to talk about on normie media. I know it's like that, I'm sure in Aotearoa, so just like
Absolutely.
It is here. Yeah. No, I'm happy to be here.
It was one of the things that grabbed me about the concept. Yeah, it was. Yes, it does feel like group therapy. A lot of activism these days feels like mental health work, so self-help, just to feel sane. And I also saw you pop up on Psychic Militancy with Lara Sheehy, who was here.
Yeah, that's one of the shows I produce.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I thought you might. Yeah. I highly recommend that. She had Kasana Busito on, and it was, So, so we, it's a small world in some ways, because we're all connected. So anyway, I thought what we'd talk about today is mainly Iran. So obviously this is, the situation is awful, and I don't imagine it's going to suddenly resolve anytime soon. People don't seem to be registering much the significance of the fact that the Hegseth and Trump are asking for $200 billion which is perhaps seems like an abstract number, but that is more than the amount that was needed to invade and occupy Iraq. So yeah, how do you feel? What do you think is going on at the moment, and what do you know about what's happening in Iran?
Well, so that's a two-part question. So I'll start with the how do you feel part, I guess. I feel it's definitely a mixed feeling. I recognize the historic nature of this moment, that a very painful legal, like juridical and economic, basically terrorism, strangulation, like genocidal warfare, has been broken to a certain degree. Not entirely, but the simple act of closing Hormuz and potentially mining it. I don't know if that's the truth, but I don't know what the actual state of is. But I think I think at the very least we know that they're hugging the coast very closely after the IRGC or whoever's in charge of that. I guess it's the IRGC Navy gives them the A-OK, and $2 million is the toll. And I'm still not sure. I have to find this out. I also heard that there is a dollar per barrel fee as well on top of the $2 million. So what's essentially happened is that Iran has used this opportunity of this illegal war that was kicked off with like major war crimes to respond by activating what could be called a kind of passive shield, which through like the act of kind of speaking and a kind of an act of sovereignty have sort of issued to the world that we will no longer tolerate our position in the world as economic and legal pariah, while the rest of the planet gets to enjoy the fruits of the energy harvested in the region that goes by every day past Iranian shores. So if Iranians are not allowed to participate in the global economy, then nobody in the region gets to participate. And unless you abide by the rules, and there are friendly countries that have been doing that. So in effect, and I've been saying this on podcasts left and right, what's happened is a kind of geopolitical flip. A kind of wrestling flip, if you want to like talk about wrestling later, like an inversion, where the tools that were the force that was being used on Iran of strangling has now been like ripped off and now applied to the main actor who was in charge of that strangulation, so like on the opponents, and because the nature of that actor is not a single person but a vast global web of vassal countries, corporations, finance institutions, and everything with it that goes with it, that if you deny air, like, you know, in the sense of energy but also capital, if you deny them access to the printing money, the Arab money printing machines, I call it, which is like people call the GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, Persian Gulf Cooperation Council. That would be the first thing I think they should do, is rename the GCC, just to flex. But that's essentially what's happened. There's been a flip, and barring Iran being separated from the Strait of Hormuz or lifted away from it, and Iran's the capitulation of essentially like a completely unified 92 million people, which are two impossible tasks, then this situation is not going to change. They can bomb Iran. They certainly can. They are running out of standoff munitions because there hasn't been. They don't have the freedom of air supremacy as they like to claim inside Iran. In fact, they keep getting hit, which is its own humiliation and its own devastating consequences to the military-industrial complex of the U.S. But they've been flying to the borders and or a little bit into the country, and then firing off these standoff missions. Those are very expensive, and over time you run out. And Iran is a big country, right? You can't just bomb it into submission. So the task they have ahead of themselves is huge. And now they're talking about a ground invasion of Khark, or I've seen the other different islands around the Persian Gulf, and I don't know. I just did a podcast this morning to answer the second question The first one was, how do you feel? The second one was, what do you know inside the country? I've spoken to my cousin. I've spoken to my aunt. Both are okay. You can hear my cousin's rage. We spoke for like a good 30 minutes yesterday. You can hear my cousin's rage. He asked me to tell the world, like, they're bombing civilians. It's just naked war crime after another. There's no military. They're out of things to hit that they can claim to be military. So they're just bombing civilians. So it's like a typical colonial punishment for declaring sovereignty. It's very common. And I spoke to my aunt. You could tell that they were very worried about losing power, because that's a very real anxiety for them. But that hasn't happened yet. It seems that like those threats were not. I mean, it hasn't been that. I don't think that 48 hours is up, and who knows. And the Israelis did hit one gas station. I have to remember. But Iran responded back and hit one of theirs. So I don't know. We are at a weird inflection moment, because clearly the shield around the enemy has gone down, or it's been severely compromised. So that shield was like multifold. It was at the outset a freaking Arab Gulf shield, like a Khaliji shield, the Arab dome of all these fake Khaliji countries with like fake sovereignty that are just like an excuse to have bases there and print money and corporations, and also surveil Iran. So once that was like one of the first places that they started hitting, was the radars built around Iran in these last 30 years. So essentially, what I heard from my friend in Iran and the couple of episodes that I've done is that people are surprised by the level of response of the IRGC and the Iranian state to its aggressive, but pleased with sort of standing for Iranian sovereignty. I think people are sort of excited. I think that was how he described it, about what's been happening in the Gulf. I think it's, I inferred this. This is me. I have no proof of this, but other than conversations with relatives and what I gleaned from online. But there is a real violence in putting a glass ceiling above people. It makes you feel left out. It makes you feel like you're not worthy of being part of like the normal world. It's like, you see that shiny mall over there? No Iranians allowed. Sorry. You're not allowed. Too much Palestine support. So that it feels to me like that era is over. That Iran can just dictate whatever it wants to do with the Hormuz card, and you can't change that. You can't. The more you hit Iran, the more it can say, okay, the reparations bill goes up. Now we're going to take that from these incredibly indefensible countries that are built around oil wells, that masquerade as countries, but really are just like places that were invented to house a certain class of Arab monarchists and their working force, and an army of like Arab labor that has been pushed out of the region through wars, through displacement, into there. We're forced to like create careers there. So that setup is over. That era of the Persian Gulf is over. A country as big as Iran, when it says you're not gonna cross this line, it means it. So this is a new era for U.S. imperial power. There's no more. I say this a lot, but there's like no more soft targets. Like they used to say, like, what is it? Real men go to Tehran or something? Something go to Baghdad. Yeah. Real men go to Tehran. There's like the first part of that. Somebody should Google it. I could Google it.
Yeah.
It was John Bolton, maybe?
An old neocon saying, from around 2004. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, what was first called the War on Terror, and then the Global War on Terror, was often referred to as the Long War by some people, and who set it down for 30 years, and the list of targets kind of terminated with Iran. But of course, I think the intent was that Iran would be dealt with earlier than that, and the end target would be China, presumably. I think one of the things that I note about this is that that Iran isn't concerned about words. They worked out that the words mean nothing, and it's actually only changing the situation on the ground that means anything. And the war aim, their declared war aim that I think is most interesting is that they want an end to wars in the Middle East, because they understand that if they come to some agreement to end the conflict, that does not take away from the US's further ability to wage another genocidal assault on them. They are simply becoming a very large Gaza, in effect, which is the model which they are trying to use throughout the Middle East. It is good to see that Iran doesn't accept these terms anymore, and I feel that in some ways Maduro also showed that he knew that what the game was before his capture as well, and that trying to placate wasn't working. He instead went for a public diplomacy approach, where instead of trying to bluster to show strength, he said, "We don't want war," and I think that's much more effective. So in that sense, I feel that some of the tools of the empire have been wrested from them. But yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about that and that sort of situation going forward?
Well, I've always felt that in the sort of long term. Okay, so I feel that when Iranians say, "Oh, we are negotiating in good conscience, we are trying, we are reaching over," that there is a real sense, there is a chunk of the Iranian populace, and I can't tell you how big that chunk is. I think that's impossible to tell, even for somebody who lives their whole life in the country. I think there's no way that a country as big, as diverse as Iran, you can really... But however big that slice of the country is that believes that some kind of middle ground with the U.S. can be reached, with the West can be reached, whereby Iran's sovereignty can be respected in exchange for a concession on the nuclear question. This was basically the premise of the so-called Iran deal, JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive something of Action. I don't remember, but JCPOA, Iran deal. And that was basic premise, is that that liberal class who signed it, and you have to remember, Ayatollah Khamenei was against that pact. He said publicly that you cannot trust these people. And he was right, because what happened 3 years later, they ripped it up and laughed and put this, and Iran never got the sanctions relief. And then it also did damage to its nuclear program because Iranians, unlike Westoids, held up their side of the bargain. So there was in that sector of the population, which is probably significant, a sense that, okay, like, let's do what they did. Let's do what they say they want us to do. And then we did it and it didn't go our way. Then the other half of the other part of the country that says, like, resistance is the only way, refusing negotiations. And this is like what gets paraded here as hardliner. In Iran, it's like the principlist position versus the reformer. This is like the basic kind of, let's say, axis of the country, of the political axis of the country. And one of the consequences of the 12-day war was solidifying the positions of the principalists and saying that, like, we were negotiating with them. We had a deal on the way. We were trying to solve it, and then they attacked us. So like that. So that's them saying to the public, we tried to do that, but it didn't like go our way. So I believe that there's a kind of two-part game when Iranian diplomats, and remember the Iranian diplomacy changes, diplomatic stat changes quite drastically between governments. The Raisi government was very different in its foreign policy posture than the Pezeshkian, at least before the 12-day war. And there were a lot of criticisms, including myself, for what I understood to be kind of inaction on Gaza. So understanding the dynamics of Iranian domestic politics, because those guys have their first duty is to 92 million Iranians, at least in theory. Mm-hmm. And if they're not accountable to that population and figuring out what the population wants and which way and which, and act and coordinate their actions through those desires, at least in theory, that's how it's supposed to go, then if it was, say, like not a popular thing, and say 2015 Khamenei squashed JCPOA, do you really think, how would that have gone for the country? Probably not very well. I think that people would have said, oh, look, like we're trying to do democracy here. We have this government. The government wants to do. We voted them in, and they're getting squashed by the supreme leader. So there is a, even though he himself was saying this is pointless. I mean, not so many words, but he said they basically can't be trusted. So it is, the primary weight of this sort of negotiating posture is, I would say, for the domestic audience and also for the rest of the world, in showing that, like, oh, Iranians are like serious actors. They take the world of diplomacy and international exchange and discourse very seriously, unlike the fucking West. Look, so Iranians like are participating in this like theater of international diplomacy and law when you have like the Chud prince himself, Hegseth, bragging about war crimes. And so that's like part of this to understand. I would say now that the negotiations are over. That whatever you want to say, that Iran's moves are complete, that they've announced their intentions of decolonizing the region of American imperial presence, and they're following through on that with diligency, and also announcing that the hitherto free transit of the global economy through Hormuz is no longer the case, that it's now going to be permanently nationalized through Iran and subject to Iranian sovereignty. So this is like there's no going back from this. Like they could nuke Iran and it wouldn't change this. It would probably get a lot worse. Like, so this is not I don't think the imperialists realize. I mean, they have, but I think at the beginning of all of this, they expected less of a ferocious response, which is crazy because I expected this. I mean, I expected this in theory. I had never actually gone down the line of playing out the war game scenario of like, we do this and then what? And then Hormuz and then Bab el-Mandeb in Yemen and Red Sea and like, wait, really? We're going to like, that's it? You just, and I've always said this, that the global economy exists or continues at the hospitality of Iran. And think about how painful that is, as Iranians have been so impoverished and immiserated by the world, by the West, and the world that's built around it. So, you know, it's a new ball game, and there's a new sheriff of the region, and that sheriff is angry and enraged, and like people are going to have to start forking up money to Iran if they want the most vital resources that society needs. Just oil, gas alone accounts for the difference between oil and gas and collapse, and having oil, gas, and not having it is the difference between society continuing to dysfunction in this current moment or collapsing. And you're probably witnessing that right now where you live, that like how tenuous this global system was, and Iran allowed it all these years. That's mindfuck for me.
But I don't think that the US empire has a lot of choice in this. They knew all of these things were going to happen. And at every step of the way, they've acted as is their wont to ensure that peace did not happen as well. I mean, they initiated the war very soon after the Omani foreign minister announced that peace was around the corner, and seemed to do it without having sorted out their pretext for why they were going to war. So it seemed to be ahead of schedule. They killed Larijani.
Khamenei, killing Khamenei was like, that's the thing. Like, okay, people who, like I've said this a lot on podcasts, so if you're listening to this and you've heard me, I'm sorry, but this is the addiction to flexing on their enemies. Because you want to flex on your enemies, and you want to show your people that you flex on your enemies, because you have to, like, they have their own domestic market and domestic considerations in their calculations too, the way that our side does. So their thing is killing people. That's their thing. Like that's. No, I think they killed the wrong guy. Like they killed a guy who was beloved by 100 million plus around the world, from Nigeria to deep in South Asia, Pakistan, Bangladesh. Like, there are huge numbers of people around the world who look to this guy as an important leader, as a rock. Like, they had a picture of him in his house. This is hard for Westoids to understand because we're so fucking secular, and religion and the meaning of religion has been yoinked out of our lives, and instead we have these stupid fucking fetish objects, Funko Pops, that we array around our lives to like replace the gods that we once had, or God. And what's left of like the religiosity is like violent Christian Zionism, like backwards Sunni Salafoids, and like backwards, like, oh, my mom told me it's bad to brush my teeth during Ramadan, like just silly self-involved religion of just purely isolated obsession of like the individual. But like in this part of the world, with these people, Shia Muslims, you have profound devotion, and they were devoted to these dudes. They're like marjas. They're sources of imitation. So killing one of these guys is like you are igniting religious war. And I believe it's more important for them I believe that it's the flex, not only like to show that you're powerful, but they need religious war. They like the idea of religious war because that stokes the embers of their own people's rage and like bloodlust and whatever. So this is the strange moment we're caught in, where doing things to Iran to flex on it is very costly, and far costlier than just continuing to let Iran flounder as the way it was. Like, it would have, like, the choking of the country was working, but they needed to do this, like, for themselves. I don't know, for geopolitical strategic reasons. That's what baffles me. I don't think they actually needed to do this.
I think the two are colliding. The contradictions within the US are getting the fakery and the corruption and the amount of scamming involved in the US economy and politics has gotten to the point where they need to pursue this program. Let's say we go back to the Long War and the idea that real men go to a form of like hypersonic missiles that meant that the US Navy suddenly becomes far less useful. And also China's economic development, because it's not deliberately undermining its own economic functioning in order to maintain a kind of social hierarchy, has meant that the US is caught on its own internal contradictions, but it needs to pursue this. Otherwise, it will lose control because the US will lose its reserve status and so forth, and China is going to outcompete. They're also another important thing, because petroleum is so central to the US, is that there will be petroleum production is quite high at the moment, and as soon as renewables hit a certain point, they'll reach a tipping point, and suddenly producers will be reducing prices in order to be competitive with each other, and the price will drop rapidly because the capacity for production is there and the demand won't necessarily stay. All that investment's already gone into extraction and refinement and transport. So unless you create artificial scarcity, which the US has done before now with wars and will continue to do, but once there are enough renewables, the value of the resource drops off a cliff, really.
I want to believe that, to be honest, but I don't feel like the transition to renewables, it can't, like, it's that needed to be done in peacetime. Like, it's too late. It's too, at least in the sense for the world, for if it was actually going to happen at a scale, like I find it hard to believe, like, which is to say, I find it hard to believe that it's possible now, given what the US has wrecked the entire world, like the world economy. So it's hard for me to imagine, like, how would you do that now? Like, how do you move forward as
I'm
humanity?
not talking about some. Yeah, I'm not talking about some positive move to renewables. What I mean is that if you've got even one large producer like Russia able to undercut the producers you control, and it's no
I see.
coincidence that
Yeah,
the
yeah,
US
yeah. I
has
see.
taken over
Right.
Venezuela, then
Right.
suddenly the
Yeah.
value of the oil drops once you hit a
Right.
certain amount of renewable.
Yeah.
So that's their mechanism of control is to control the oil. This is the Carter Doctrine. So this is, I hope, is the last gasp of this empire. But I'm very reluctant to write off the US empire at any stage, because people have been doing that for a long time, and it's always proven to be untrue. I mean, the thing about the US empire is it pretends to fight wars. Wars are politics continued by other means, but of course the wars are a pretext for a destructive genocidal approach to everyone and everything, which is how they run their empire.
Yeah, they profit off of it, and that's the basis of their economic. But that's the thing, this is what they sacrificed, because they showed that a country that's mid-sized, in terms of, I guess it's a large country, mind you, with a very deep strategic kind of sort of with serious strategic depth, right? So, and that also pursued a strategy of sovereignty, that if the U.S. can't defeat Iran handily, then what's the point? If it can't stomp on these countries, then what was the point of this whole thing? If it can't use those aircraft carriers against Iran, they got chased out of the sea. They got chased out of the region. They got struck, and they had this laundry fire, whatever. No, it's obviously horseshit. They got struck by some kind of missiles, and they had to leave. So if now they have to confront the fact that, all these toys are effectively useless unless the enemy has achieved very little actual, they can only beat a basically defenseless enemy. And this is where, especially, and the farther you are from the U.S. mainland, the easier it gets to defend yourself, because this is the difficulty I imagine Venezuela has. Venezuela being where it is, that even if it had the kind of power that Iran had, which it doesn't, that even if it had, that they're that close to the U.S. empire, and the U.S. empire has deep amount of resources right there. And so that is a very real calculation that Iranians don't have to necessarily. It's actually the opposite. The U.S.'s assets are all expensive, arrayed around them within, spitting distance, and lands that, remember, in Bahrain is 80% Shia. Right? You think they're loyal to the Sunni monarchs and to the Sunni police who beat them down and keep them poor? You think they wouldn't be happy to spy for Iran, which is a Shia sovereign country, many of them looking to Ayatollah Khamenei as or used to at least, as a leader for and how they practice? That's not in the same with Iraq. Iraq is predominantly Shia. Those Shia have predominantly anti-American, pro-Iran politics. And so when you have this many actors arrayed together, this is unstoppable. The bridge between Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, which in 2011 during the Arab Spring, so-called Arab Spring, that was key to bringing in Saudi police and Saudi military to help quell the uprising. That bridge has been struck. Yeah. So this is something that this is a new Middle East. The Israelis like to crow about redrawing boundaries, but I think they didn't realize that two could play at this game, and that the numbers don't benefit them. That long term, you imagine you're a Zionist, you are living in Los Angeles in the valley somewhere, you are 16 years old, and you're an American, but you've been radicalized by Israeli Zionist, propaganda, and you want to go and okay, it's my turn. My parents didn't have the guts to go and do the colonizing, but I'm going to go do it. Then you look at what's happening there. And then you okay, double check the flights. Oh, I can't come back? Oh, I can't even get there? Oh, it cost how much? Oh, all those sweet economic packages are gone. Oh, what does everything so you've part of anti-Zionist, anti-colonial framework that Axis has set up is not just defeating Zionism militarily, which they are doing handily. Hezbollah on its own in the north is doing that. But it's also about ruining the project itself. That you take the fun out of colonizing. And so it means that you can't just live peacefully. You have to, like, you're harassed with sirens every 3 hours. That, like, find the insecurity that they have used as a weapon against all of their enemies, that they've menaced with their enemies, the sense of, oh, we're going to disrupt and destroy your daily life because we can. Now that's been
literally unsettling them.
Yeah, exactly. That's true. Yeah, like you can't, like if you're like, we are Westoids. We live in the West, okay? Our lives are based around 100% equanimity, like complete peace, complete order, right? Like that, like everything within, like credit cards reach, like it has to be 100%. There's no space for, some kind of like hillbillies like squatting on the horizon there in the corner. You have to clear that shit. You need to send cows there to do grazing so you can make beef. Like that's the Westoid order, right? But that disorder is something that they're not used to. Right? Disorder is hard. Mm-hmm. It's hard to make stupid apps in your Silicon Valley that like surveil you when you have to go to a shelter every 3 hours. Like it's hard to continue that high tech, high finance economy. So and remember, Yemen hasn't even showed up yet. So the fun, the sense of them being besieged and like, like the birds and in a Hitchcock movie, like that's what this is about, is that you like swarm them. And the metaphor that they used was flood, right? Like a flood is an instant, right? It like starts off as like a heavy rainstorm that you're like, whatever, I have roof, I have fucking gutters, I have, weeping tile, like it'll go somewhere. But then the weepers fill up and then it starts backing up and then it backs up into your house. And then you have to like, anyways, can you tell I've had water problems in my house? Okay, I'm going to stop talking.
I mean, a flood is also a dam bursting, built up pressure being released. But I want to rewind a little bit to you were talking about Shia, and obviously there's been some success in breaking the axis of resistance, so-called, but the Shia crescent that people used to talk about is still there. That's a demographic reality, has made countries like Iraq and Iran problems. So they've never been able to get a good compliant puppet regime in Iraq. The second Hashemite king actually ran an anti-imperial, anti-British person out of the basement of his palace and, subsequently died in a car crash, which I'm sure had absolutely nothing to do with the British at all. Back to coup, put someone in. After time, the simple realities of functioning in that society have drawn them into a more of a nationalistic, anti-imperialist stance. And obviously the same thing has happened in Iran with, before Mossadegh, there was, the monarchy was not so convenient anyway. And then even with Reza Pahlavi, towards the end, the US was finding that he was getting to be undesirable in his ambitions that cut against their own imperial interests. And I've heard you talking previously about the way that the nature of the Shia religion tends to promote a degree of anti-authoritarianism. So how do you think that has played out and might play out in the future in places like Bahrain? And also, I mean, just to throw in something else, cross-sectarian solidarity as well with Sunni field.
That's the point I was going to stress, is that part of understanding, part of kind of, I would say, is that all of us have to kind of like work to kind of get these ideas out of our head that have been really inculcated into us, especially since Iraq II war, which is to say, so 2003, because these terms, because this partly the reason is that the sectarian impulse is something that imperialists like to wield, right? But historically, that the Shia and Sunni have not had kind of ISIS scale, like the phenomenon of ISIS, right, which is like an open ally of the Israeli and American regimes. Like I refuse to entertain any possibility that they were able to reach this scale and size without the help of CIA, Mossad, and all of the sort of useful intelligence agencies of like Turkey, Saudi Arabia, God knows who, UAE. So this was like a group project that Sy Hirsch famously called it the redirection, is to channel a kind of radical Islamic energy in the service of American imperialism. And of course, this isn't new. This worked in Afghanistan, and there's previous examples of this. But ultimately, sectarianism is a tool of empire. But the fact that Iran's solidarity with Palestine is not a Shia, is not because it's Shia. It's not because Sunnis, Palestinians are mostly Sunni, right? Like there's a very tiny minority in who are Shia. So it's not because of the identity of themselves, but it's the larger project of Islam and anti-colonialist Islam. Right? That's the question. Are you part of colonial imperial Islam? Are you Saudi Arabia's Western imposed monarchy? Right? That have been a key pillar of American and British power for over a century, and whose resources have been used to keep banks afloat here, who could have been, funneled back into the region itself. And the region could have been the most advanced place in the world, unlike where it is now, which is one of the most developed places. So this is like the stranglehold over this region's wealth that the imperialists have enjoyed is coming to an end. This is what people need to understand, that era of pure Mr. Moneybucks, like Scrooge McDuck jumping in a black pool like the freaking Harkonnen guy, like that's over. There's no more. That era is done. The wealth is now going to be spread now going to be controlled by the indigenous actors. Will that be Iran itself? I don't think so. I think that there will be new parties, there will be new actors. The longer this war goes on, the more Iran will have, let's say, leverage or justification in taking. So the reparations that they're demanding, that Ayatollah Khamenei has already announced in his first sort of speech, was saying that, because this was a war imposed on us, we demand reparations, and we'll take them in one way or another. We'll either inflict them on you, or we'll take them out of the wealth in the region. So this is a new world we are in, and I think people who are listening to this, I think, you can accuse me of like Iranian chauvinism, which I am guilty of, that even still, that it's not, you can't crack the nut of the Hormuz Straits. You cannot. There is nothing that will change that reality. And I just, the era of Iran's, let's say, expulsion from the world order is over. That either everyone is a pariah in the world system, which is the current situation, which is because everybody's being strangled, or no one is. Either everyone in the region gets to have peace or no one does. So if Israel wants to flex on its neighbors, Iran will flex on Israel. So this is the new calculation. It took a long time, a lot of sacrifices to get here. And the Iranians waited until they were struck. And now they have every right, even if the international system of law is fictional to begin with. But even within that system, Iran has virtually every right to demand these things and take the reparations and the consequences thereof. There's no right to empire. There's no right to have radar bases all around countries. You don't, especially when you prove to be such a hostile actor. So if Israelis get to do all kinds of violence in the name of their national security, Iranians get to do that too. So this is the world we live in now. It's an interesting world. I don't think I definitely didn't see the consequences of all this happening. Like when I woke up that day and I got the news, it's like a month now. I did not I've always thought about Hormuz. I tweet about it, close Hormuz, let's make it happen. But it was like a meme. It was nothing more than a meme. But now it's a reality. When we're keeping it real, as the kids say. But yeah.
I mean, I think there's two things. They're pricking the bubble of the US economy, but the other thing is that all of these, the GCC states, for example, their national interests do not lie with the US. And eventually, if they look to be a regional power, the US will go for them.
I'm sorry, Kieran. I have to stop you because you have to understand. I have to stop this because I had to stop. I'm sorry. That was rude. I should have let you finish, but I feel bad. I apologize to you, all the listeners at 1F200, and anybody else who hears this. I'm sorry, but these countries do not have sovereignty. They do not have agency. They are told what they do, and the weapons they buy are under the control of the West. And it may be Saudi Arabia, with the exception of Saudi Arabia, maybe. But even then, I doubt it, because at the end of the day, their own strategic depth is so low that they couldn't even fight if they wanted to. Do you know what I mean? So I
don't disagree with you on that.
Yeah. Sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, but that's the thing. Iran understands that. That's what I'm saying. If you look at like the Lebanese government, for example, you know what?
They're being held hostage. Yeah, that's that's a Maduro. That's a Venezuela situation. Because if any of them buck whatever their American masters tell them to, they will literally, probably literally be assassinated or like taken from power. Absolutely. Like I think we've reached that level of like that's the thing. So there's now this situation, and I think it's the same with the monarchs in the Gulf. Like I think if I were the CIA, I would have dudes in the security guards among all of those kingdoms. And if any moment they strayed from their role, like, you see you later. We got a new guy. Guess what?
Well, the US has been doing this forever. They've been doing it in Latin America. They make sure that the people running are totally vulnerable all of the time. That they're in conflict with their own people and so forth. So definitely not suggesting anything other than that. I do understand that point, but what I mean is that Iran is trying to shift the calculation there, and that's what I mean. They're not trying to negotiate. They're not trying to. That's done, and it's a bit of there is a bit of a tightrope there because, of course, we live in this very hypocritical system where the US can commit any crime it wants, and it's always like an aberration, it's an error, it's a miscalculation, or whatever. But as soon, like the Palestinians have to be the perfect victims to some extent, they have to tread carefully, but they seem to have a formula that will allow the US to maintain its role as the aggressor. So, I do think things are changing, but it is very difficult to see where it will go like that. Yeah, I just kind of wonder whether Trump is like the final boss of US imperialism, the last of the long line of buffoon warmongers.
Yeah, he's the embodiment of a I will say this is that the final boss. I think he may be the final boss of liberalism. If that makes sense, is that this mode of economic
makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, like it's now there's no more liberal order. It's just fascism, and fascism is this, Stay Puft Marshmallow Man goon, half like brain rotted psychopath, murderer, child eater, rapist, like pedophile psycho, under the control of a genocidal regime, right? Like under the blackmail authority of like a genocidal regime. So this is the farce of American empire, that you have a deeply unpopular president who's destroying the country's deterrence power, who allowed for the country to lose the Middle East. Like he handed the Middle East to Iran. Like this, we have to stress this. Like he gave Iran an excuse to eject the Middle East and take away the Arab money printing machines, and in the process humiliate the American military industrial complex and defrock it and show that it was this kind of, like wizard walking behind the curtain, that there's no power there, that it's a bunch of undefended bases. And now you have this specter of first person view drones hunting the few American soldiers left on these bases. So decolonization is happening. This war prompted a mass decolonial event. And it's not being reported to you as such. It's being glossed over by the colonial media that has been put into place, partly because that colonial buildup was never reported in the first place. They never told you that there were bases in northern Iraq. They never told you about Erbil. They never told you about what was NATO doing in Erbil. They were supposed to be liberated, but they have been there since the early 90s. America has been occupying Iraq since the early 90s. They called it a no-fly zone, but that is a euphemism for occupation. But because we live under liberal media fictions and Zionist media control, that is narrated to us as no-fly zone. No, it's an occupation. And guess what? That occupation is right at Iran's footsteps. Iran is right there. Iran is a stone's throw away from this place. So Iran feels threatened by the presence of this empire that threatens it. So we're going to destroy it, and you can't defend it. And in the meantime, you lose guys, you lose resources. All of the forces that you arrayed for 3 decades to overthrow Iran have proven to be useless. You burned all your money. So the U.S. empire doesn't have any teeth right now in the region. It's just gumming, and the only thing it can do is spit terrible fireballs at Iranian civilians and Lebanese and Iraqis, and they're doing that. They're attacking the Iraqi army. They're going to war with the Iraqi state, the state that they liberated, because that's punishment for them taking back the oil field, which is happening right now. It's crazy. Crazy times.
Yeah. Yes, and Iraq. There's the potential for dominoes falling. There's been a process of dominoes falling in favour of the Zionist project recently. They could, I don't know what the opposite of dominoes falling is. They all stand up again or something. Especially Iraq. It's going to be pretty hard for the US to retain real control of that.
The thing is, it never actually had control. It did, let's say, but it gave up that control in the early 2010s when it retreated. And instead, what was left is this cardboard cutout called Uncle Sam. And Uncle Sam will be mad if you hit it. Uncle Sam will send its big bad airplanes to bomb you and your children if you hit it. Remember, everyone counted the Iraqi resistance out because they hadn't been very active in Iraq, and American bases are peppering the region. But guess what? When they killed Ayatollah Khamenei, who was a major important figure to Iraqi Shia, it was gloves off, and all of the resources and alliances that Iran has created of indigenous people around the region are now in effect working to decolonize the region. This is a scene from human history that I don't think we've seen before, where you have this multinational front of indigenous forces who have arrayed together in an alliance, an informal alliance, mind you. There's no there's a joint operations room. There's coordination, but all of these alliances are managed within their countries, because Iran couldn't manage the PMU. What the hell does PMU is in Iraq? The People's Mobilization Units, Hashd al-Sha'bi. Iran couldn't be able to coordinate PMU. Iraqis do a better job. Iran couldn't tell the Yemenis, send your bombs to this place. What the hell do Iranians know? The Yemenis know the terrain. But what they can do is play the role of Prometheus, right? Iran's Promethean role in activating and coordinating and training and empowering these indigenous allies across these countries are now being mobilized. And we're seeing very different strategies engaging each other. On the one, you have the blunt object force of the U.S. empire and its rat ethno-state colony. And on the other, you have an asymmetric force of actors, or a force fighting asymmetrically, which is to say, of indigenous actors working in their national contexts, both above ground and below it, which is to say in the domestic political sphere, but also in the military, and coordinating with their main ally, who has then provided the technical and training assistance, and funding too, because a major power has to be funded, an alliance has to be funded. So I think people in the region know, but I don't think people here in the West know the scale of this. And it's usually just like written off in that Orientalist language of, Iranian militias and this and that and blah, proxies and all this. But if it was proxies, it wouldn't work. It wouldn't work if it was a proxy. Proxy is what imperialists have. Proxy is what the Sudanese soldiers were in Yemen. They were a proxy mercenary army in deployment of Saudi Arabia. And guess what happened to them? They got defeated by Yemenis wearing sandals, like getting sniped from 300 meters away, 400 meters away. Like that was a defeat for the Saudi Empire and the U.S. Empire, because Saudis were working as a proxy. I think the Saudis probably would have left that war a lot earlier, but I don't think they had a choice. I think bin Salman could keep his kingdom or he could keep his losing war going. And it was only after the Aramco attacks in 2019 that knocked out, I think, 60% of their production for months, which was like a pinprick in effect. Only after that did they say, okay, we can't do this anymore. So that's a kind of roundabout, I think, way of understanding the actors in all of this and what's happening. I think that's the most useful way for me to grasp this. Because the national frameworks aren't enough anymore. Like like the national theaters, it's not enough.
Even a very militarized, very powerful empire like the US, I mean, to the extent that it is, because its own inefficiencies, of course, are undermining that, it still relies on divide and rule in order to retain control. And when you have something that actually unites all these people, and they don't need a central leadership, and they understand that they all share the same imperative, and they can't be bought off or whatever, then obviously the control becomes untenable. There are no historical precedents to this, but it does kind of remind me of the situation the British found themselves in India towards the end of. It just becomes unite in opposing them. Their forces are far too thin. And of course, the growing power of asymmetric warfare, which is a slightly problematic term, obviously, but the fact that the weaker party can still have these weapon systems as well is something that is challenging too. Yeah. So, are there any further thoughts you have that you'd like to add?
Oh, I think I would say that the violence, like empires die like violent deaths, and we've been watching part of that death unfold in Gaza, in South Lebanon. Before that, it was in Syria and Yemen. Before that, it was in Iraq, and before that, it was in Afghanistan, and before that, it was in Afghanistan. Before that, it was in Iraq. So, like a wave of genocidal violence has been wreaking havoc on West Asia for decades. And the primary goal is to ensure that no single power emerges strong enough to threaten the military, cultural, ethno force of Zio-American imperialism. They failed. They allowed Iran, despite all their efforts, was able to. The Islamic Republic, revolutionary Iran, was allowed. It survived. It fought for its survival successfully, and it has grown in strength to the point where it can fend off two nuclear powers at the same time and inflict such devastating blows in ways that they have never experienced. The deep insecurity that not just Zionist settlers are feeling, but American military men in the region are now feeling. This is something that's brand new to them, that the answers that they have to this violence, which is more violence, don't work on Iranians, because Iranians, you kill 5 and 20 more of them, 25 more of them stand up and they say, okay, it's my turn. Like when they were threatening Kharg Island, like people were going to the ferry terminal and saying, give me a ticket, I want to go sign up and fight. That like the numbers I just saw was like you have like a volunteer force of 1 million. That like a national mobilization was like just kind of was like, okay, let's do this, and 1 million people signed up. So 92 million people united cannot be stopped. I mean, you probably have these cliched things that you say at protest, like the people united will never be defeated. I'm sure you have this. We have all these same things. But
yes,
this, and like this is what democracy looks like. Like this is what decolonization looks like. Like we are watching these things. I cannot stress, like this is insane what we're watching. Historic moments. And you know, the flailing empire cannot do anything about it. The ethno-state cannot do anything about it. So everyone hold on to your hats, because like this is going to be a bumpy ride. It's going to be really bad for us in the West, because our system was built upon stability, and that stability is gone. It's never coming back. Like it's never coming back. This is not like a crisis that we're going to have to, you know, keep calm and carrying on. No, this is carrying on us forever and on, because like unless the American empire folds, which it won't do, like it will push other buttons, it will do other things to like keep the insanity going, and unless our planet can like rise up and like assert some kind of democracy in the name of like humanity and fight against these psychos, like they'll just keep upping the wars and they'll keep making things worse. And I don't know. I don't want to think what awaits our planet, and even if we don't do anything right now, we're still headed towards major ecological collapse, by the way, as if that wasn't bad enough. So yeah, that's my final message. Please donate to my friend Mohammed in Gaza. I will also say that if you're here if you're still here an hour in, you have deep dedication. So I ask you to donate to my friend Mohammed. The link will be in the description of this episode. That's all I ask. Thank you.
Awesome. Yep. And other than that, anything to plug? Any dissertations?
That's it. Just come check out my show. If you like this 4 hour of ranting and interrupting the poor speaker, there's lots of that where I come from, which is East is a Podcast Land. And listen to the other shows I produce. I produce Red Nation Podcast. I produce MacDeasy Street. I produce Psychic Militancy, the Adnan Hussein Show. I produce a few other shows too you probably don't heard of, but podcasts are good. They're independent. They're free. And they're nourishing, and you should check them out. And thanks for listening to me, if you stayed this long.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. And so it only remains for me to say like, share, subscribe, Patreon, etc. And I will say goodbye now.
Thank you, Kieran. Thank you, Kieran.
If artifices are denied, living a pointless life, but learning all your lessons. Fucking politics, there's no distinction. The road's upon now. It's paved with good intentions, and I'll admit that I'm at a loss for what to say when they criticize the cost we ought to stay. 'Cause I live amongst the people every day in this vindictive, forgetful fucking race.